Hello, and welcome to Thanksgiving 2021 or National Day of Mourning 2021, depending on which holiday you're observing today. I wasn't going to do a video for Thanksgiving. I was going to give myself the holiday off, but my natural curiosity got the best of me when I started looking into the original Thanksgiving. And then, of course, because I'm obsessed with astrology, I looked into the astrological chart of that original Thanksgiving. So I thought it would be fun, instead of doing my regular live stream forecast, to show you a comparison of where the planets are now versus where they were during the original Thanksgiving. So the first thing that struck me about this is that 2021 marks the 400th anniversary of Thanksgiving. The original Thanksgiving happened in 1621. We don't have an exact date because back then records were a little bit rough, but we do know that according to a nonprofit organization, the Plymouth Patuxet Museum, hopefully I'm saying that right, a pilgrim wrote a letter on December 11th, 1621, talking about this 3-day festival that was held to celebrate the harvest. So the story goes, the Pilgrims, the first people to settle in North America, were helped by the Native Americans through that first winter. After they landed in Plymouth, Massachusetts in the Mayflower, the Native Americans showed them how to grow food on this new soil in this new world. So come that first fall, those who were able to survive the winter held this 3-day harvest festival to celebrate the abundance of the season. And in this letter, dated 1621, this pilgrim named Edward Winslow talked about this 3-day festival that was held to celebrate that harvest and said that about 90 Native Americans attended. And that's the fairy tale we've all been told growing up in the US. It's important to talk about the darker side of Thanksgiving before we get into the astrology of it all, because not more than 16 years later, in 1637, the governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony proclaimed the day of Thanksgiving actually to celebrate the safe return of some pilgrims who'd massacred a Native American village. And then in more recent years, and more recently we're talking about the 1700s, the 1800s, Thanksgiving became this politicized event to really invoke national pride, to make people think there was this celebration of gratitude between the Pilgrims and the Native Americans, and that was how that relationship played out. Of course, we know that's not true. And it's really interesting when we look at the astrology chart for this time. What was going on with the stars when these pilgrims were settling, when our country was being birthed in a sense? Let's pull up the Sinistry Chart. And if you're not familiar, a Sinistry Chart essentially puts two astrology charts, birth charts, into the same chart. So let me show you this. The inner circle is going to be the original Thanksgiving in 1621, where all the planets were in comparison to Earth at that time. And because we don't have an exact date of the original Thanksgiving, I just used November 25th, 1621. We know it probably happened sometime in late November before it got too cold in Massachusetts. And we know that it happened before December 11th, at least according to that journal entry. So I just did a snapshot of the planets on this day 400 years ago in comparison to today, 2021. The inner circle is 1621. The planets in this white outer circle represent the current transits in 2021. And as with every astrology chart, there is a story to tell here, and I think it's really interesting. So we have a few different conjunctions lining up that stand out first thing when you look at this. Let's go ahead and direct our attention to Taurus. So when the Pilgrims had this first Thanksgiving, Pluto, the planet of death and rebirth, was in Taurus. And we can take this literally, Taurus being an earth sign ruling the physical, that there was this death and rebirth happening on this new soil. Pilgrims were coming in. Unfortunately, they were killing a lot of the native inhabitants or infecting them with diseases brought from Europe. And there was a literal death happening of the land, as well as a rebirth. On this Thanksgiving, they were celebrating abundance. They were celebrating the ability to grow crops and survive the winter. So Pluto in Taurus over here is talking about a death and rebirth of the physical earth. Right now, in 2021, 400 years later, Uranus in Taurus is transiting very close to that 1621 Pluto. What this tells me is that we're seeing a change in how we view the earth. That's kind of what's going on with Uranus and Taurus. We're seeing literal climate change. We're seeing a physical change to the earth. But I think this conjunction, this loose conjunction here in this Sinistry chart is showing us that our view is changing on the earth. Our view is changing on what was going on during that death and rebirth cycle on the original Thanksgiving. Our view of the physical earth is changing. Back then, it was kind of a plant your flag and stake your claim and you own this land, whereas now we know that's definitely not true. And I think in more recent years, we've come to understand that nobody really owns this land. Mother Earth is making it very clear that she is a sovereign being and no one can really claim her. No one can really control her, especially humans. So I think it's really interesting that today's Uranus is transiting on top of where Pluto was in 1621. Another conjunction that stands out is right here, also involving Uranus. So direct your attention to that inner circle. Uranus was in Leo in 1621. This is an innovative energy. It likes to change things. And we were seeing a change in identity of this nation. It wasn't even a nation yet, of this land. The identity of North America was changing as the Pilgrims landed. So as Uranus was slowly transiting through Leo, we saw the identity of America change, the identity of Western culture in general change, the identity of the native culture change. Leo kind of rules that identity, rules the self, rules the ego. And of course, Uranus, the planet of rebellion, the planet of innovation. We were seeing a ton of upheaval when it came to identity in 1621. Right now, in 2021, the moon in Leo will transit exactly on top of where Uranus was in 1621. So the moon rules our emotions, our emotional awareness. And this year, 400 years later, with the moon in Leo transiting on top of where Uranus was, I think signals an emotional awareness about that change that was happening 4 centuries ago. We are more emotionally checked into what was going on now than I think the Pilgrims might have been even at that point. I think especially in 2021, as we mark this sort of 400th anniversary, a lot of people are checking in and asking, how does Thanksgiving feel for me? And having just more of that emotional awareness of the truth of this holiday that we celebrate, and we often overlook the reality of the situation, the reality of how Native Americans were treated on this land for hundreds of years following the first Thanksgiving and are still treated today. I think in 2021, you're going to see, even just on social media, more people talking about the impact to Native Americans, the emotional toll the Pilgrims, Westerners coming in, staking their claim had on these indigenous people. I think that's going to be really apparent this year. Okay, so now let's look at the nodes. So you can see the North Node in 1621 was in Scorpio, and the current North Node is on the cusp of Gemini and Taurus. So we're starting to see an opposition here. It's not an exact opposition, but again, this isn't an exact chart. So here's how I'm seeing this. The North Node represents our direction, the lessons we're learning. So in 1621, the North Node was in Scorpio, signaling this direction of death and rebirth. And we know as the centuries played out, death and rebirth was a cycle that happened because of the pilgrims coming in. That was the direction the US was heading in before it was even the US. You can see now the North Node currently in Gemini is all about the information age, attaining information. The direction our country is heading in is being more informed, taking in information in different ways. And I can see this playing out as the direction we are heading in as a country in 2021 is almost the exact opposite of the direction we were heading in 1621. That's the story this opposition tells to me. It's almost like the US has done a 180 from the mentality that the pilgrims had. Now we're all about inclusion. Now we're all about understanding other people's points of views. Now, as the North Node is heading into Taurus, our direction is in fostering that connection with the earth. So the direction we're heading in today is pretty much the exact opposite of the direction the pilgrims were heading in and taking this new land in when they first stepped off the Mayflower and had this first Thanksgiving. Something else interesting is that Jupiter is forming a trine to Jupiter. So you can see Jupiter was in Gemini in 1621, coming within a degree of a trine to current Jupiter in Aquarius. A trine is a harmonious angle. It's a flowing angle. These energies flow naturally with each other. This signals to me that both 2021 and 1621 were times of growth and expansion. The country was growing, consciousness was growing as the pilgrims landed. Was it going in a great direction? Well, that's for you to decide. But we know that there's a ton of expansion and growth happening currently in 2021 as the identity of the country shifts, as structures are crumbling, as the United States is going through its Pluto return right now. This trine between Jupiter in 1621 and Jupiter in 2021 signals to me that both of these periods have been times of great expansion. Of course, it's easy to say in 1621, there was expansion, there was optimism, things were growing. Awareness was heightening and expanding. And I think the same thing is happening in 2021, but in a much different way. Now we're seeing our place in humanity, our place in the collective. Something else that stands out to me about the original Thanksgiving's chart, if you look at the inner circle, is that we're seeing almost an exact opposition between Mars and Uranus, the planet of drive and motivation, and the planet of innovation and transformation. We can look at an opposition as two energies that are working towards different goals. This looks to me like these pilgrims, mostly men, let's be honest, coming in, staking claim for their land, taking what's theirs. So the identity of the country is changing, but people are thinking about themselves a little bit more than the collective. That's kind of how I see that playing out. And it's interesting, the relationship we now have between the self and the country. I think that's changed quite a bit over the course of really the past couple of decades, but I think that's always been a struggle that's played out in US culture, self versus country. We sing anthems pledging allegiance to our flag, but so often throughout history, we've seen time and time again people saying, I don't align with this. I have my own values. I have my own beliefs. So it's just funny to look back at 1621 and see that opposition playing out, almost setting the stage for that mentality moving forward. I want to talk about this last thing that pops out to me in this Sinistry chart. So we have this exact trine between current Neptune, 2021 Neptune, and 1621 Saturn. You can see Saturn over here in Cancer, and it's forming a trine, a harmonious angle to Neptune in Pisces currently. What this tells me is that we can take the lessons from the past, we can take the lessons Mother Earth is literally teaching us and use those lessons to support our vision and our dreams for the future of this country. Saturn is the planet of restrictions and boundaries and hard lessons. And we've gone through many of those things in the past 400 years. But if we can use that knowledge, if we can use that experience, if we can all get on the same page, which is definitely way easier said than done, the lessons of the past can flow with the big dreams that we have for the future of this country, for the ideals that we hold about what the USA should be. If we look back to the lessons that started forming in 1621 at this first Thanksgiving, we can move forward with a more realistic approach, with that realistic, practical mentality that Saturn brings into the picture, but we can also allow ourselves to dream of a better future, hold those ideals of what we think this nation should be, of the new world we're trying to create. In 1621 and 2021, people are still trying to create a more beautiful version of this world, a new world, literally. There is another mass awakening happening all across the world right now, but from my perspective in the US as well, of what this country can be, what this new world can be. And I think even though we can look back on 1621 and see that motivations might have been misguided, I think the intention was still to create this new, more beautiful world. And I think that that's something that we can still appreciate and align with, regardless of how we feel about the original Thanksgiving and what played out in the years after that. So I just thought that would be a fun little informative way to talk about this 400th anniversary of Thanksgiving, the tradition that started in 1621. And if you're an astrology nerd like me and this chart is just as interesting to you, comment below and let me know if you saw any other associations that I missed, or you have any other insights to share about what was going on 400 years ago compared to today. All right, now let's get into today's transit so you can be prepared before you head out the door to your Thanksgiving gathering, before you enter maybe an overwhelming situation, or just so you can be in the right mindset when you're heading to this gathering of gratitude.